Go ahead and start welcoming everyone. Um, we are here tonight. Thank you for joining us and welcome. I'd like to thank Kellogg-Hubbard Library. Oh, sorry. I get distracted every time I see like a message pop up on my computer screen. So we're doing this wonderful event with the Kellogg-Hubbard Library. Thanks for hosting. I'm Samantha. I'm here representing Bear Pond Books. And we are here with two authors, Sarah Stewart Taylor, author of The Mountains Wild. I like to hold up the books as I talk about them. And Miciah Gault, author of Goodnight Stranger. I'm sorry we can't be together in person, but as we were just talking about how great it is to have everybody from all over, we have people from New Hampshire, people from Vermont. Sarah mentioned that she did an author event with an author from Florida, and this might be a good time to mention that the next event Bear Pond and Kellogg-Hubbard is doing together is with an author from Florida. Her name is Chelsea Catherine, and this is her book, Summer of the Cicadas. She is a graduate of Vermont College of Fine Arts, so she did live in Vermont for a few years, but she is now down in Florida, and she'll be doing our next event on December 10th, and it'll be a conversation with Thomas Christopher Green, who is the former president of VCFA. So please register for that. You can register at bearpondbooks.com or at Kellogg-Hubbard Library. Is it .org for that website? Yeah. A few housekeeping items. I believe you should be muted. If you're not muted, please mute yourself now. This will keep down any background noise for tonight's reading and talk. We are recording this video. If you do not wish to have your face recorded, please turn off your camera, and you can do that at the bottom of your screen. On the left, it says stop video. This video will be shared on social media and on YouTube and on the websites of Kellogg-Hubbard Library and bearpondbooks.com. This is going to be an exciting talk about Sarah's police procedural, The Mountains Wild. It's the first in a new series, and New York Times bestselling author Deborah Crombie says, with its evocative Dublin setting, lyrical prose, tough but sympathetic heroine, and a killer twist in the plot, Sarah Stewart Taylor's The Mountains Wild should top everyone's must-read lists this year. And we agree. I know Miciah says she absolutely loves this book. If you don't already have a copy, I suggest that you get one from Bear Pond Books. I'm going to put the link in the chat box. We do have a website where you can order the book online. We ship anywhere in the US. Can everybody see that link? I just put it in the chat box. Feel free to say hello in the chat box too. We ship anywhere in the US. We can also do in-store pickup. So if you are local in the Vermont area, central Vermont, you can pick up the book at the store. Tonight, Sarah will read briefly from the book, and then we will be treated to a lively discussion with Miciah, whose novel Goodnight Stranger also has a killer plot twist. This book is in paperback and it's available also at Bear Pond Books. I'm going to put that link in the, I'm having a hard time copying the link, in the chat box. I think I'm going to put that link in the chat box. After the discussion, we will open it up for Q&A from the audience. So please use your chat box to put any questions you have. Here's the Goodnight Stranger link. So there's two book links. Yeah, so I'm going to do a quick intro for each author, and then I'll pass it over to Sarah, who will open with a reading. So Miciah Gault, as you know, I held up her debut novel, Goodnight Stranger. It was longlisted for the Center for Fiction's First Novel Prize, nominated for the Shirley Jackson Award for the novel, and selected as a first fiction feature by poets and writers. Her fiction and essays have appeared in the New York Times Modern Love column, Tin House, Poets and Writers, The Sun, the Literary Review, and other places, including the anthology Contemporary Vermont Fiction. Miciah served as the editor of the journal Hunger Mountain for 9 years and as the coordinator for the Vermont Book Award. She now teaches in the MFA in Writing and Publishing program at Vermont College of Fine Arts. Sarah Stewart Taylor is the author of the Sweeney St. George series and the Maggie Darcy series, which is The Mountains Wild. She grew up on Long Island where one of her dad's friend was recently swimming,
Yes.
as recently as like yesterday.
Yes.
And she received degrees at Middlebury College in Vermont and Trinity College in Dublin, where she studied Irish literature. She's worked as a journalist and writing teacher and now lives with her family on a farm in Vermont where they raise sheep and grow blueberries. Oh, too bad it's not blueberry season. So please welcome Sarah Stewart Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm so happy to be here with all of you and with Miciah, whose work I admire so much. I read Goodnight Stranger over summer vacation. We were on a lake in the Adirondacks, and I brought it with me, and I was so excited to read it. And it was one of those books that I started it, and really nothing else happened until until I finished it. And I was sitting by a lake, so it was perfect. But it's a novel that I think is so beautifully written and so rich and so suspenseful and spooky and thought-provoking, and I just love it. So I'm excited to talk to Miciah about some common threads I think that we found in our books around sort of siblings and sibling-like cousins and ghosts and identity, and there's some interesting parallels, I think. So The Mountains Wild is it's a police procedural, as Samantha said. It takes place in 2 time periods, and my main character, Maggie Darcy, is a college student, a recently graduated, recent college graduate in the 1993 section of the novel. She's living on Long Island and working at her uncle's bar when they get a call that her beloved cousin Erin, who's really more of a sibling to Maggie, has disappeared in Ireland. And Maggie has to go over to see if she can figure out what happened to Erin. She doesn't really find out a lot. She sort of follows Erin's path over the last 3 weeks before she disappeared. And eventually she returns home, not really having learned much at all. And then 23 years later, Maggie has become a police detective. She's the divorced mother of a teenage daughter, and she and her uncle get a call that new evidence has been found. And she returns to Ireland to see if she can solve this case once and for all. And I thought it would be fun to read to you from the section of the book where Maggie arrives in Dublin for the first time in 1993. I lived in Dublin when I was in my early 20s, and I think this part of the book was really fun to write because it sort of it really brought me back to my first impressions of a country I was really interested in, a place I hadn't spent much time. And I have these very sort of vivid, visceral memories of arriving for the first time. So this is Maggie's arrival. I arrived in Dublin on a wet, gray morning, the 1st of October. The airport was a 70s movie, psychedelic carpet, cigarette smoke thick in the arrivals hall. Ireland. Cold, wet air swept through me when I walked outside to find a cab. The accents were familiar from the bar, where we always had a guy or two just off the plane, but they took on a different quality when they filled all the spaces around me, looser, more confident. Changing money, I was conscious of my own accent, the nasal of it, the loud upward pitch of my words. The cab driver was a skinny, leggy old man who said, "God bless you now, love. Take care of yourself," when I got out at Erin's house. Gordon Street was a little side street near a canal, a twisting, narrow lane of squat little stucco 1- and 2-story houses, almost in miniature, with brick or red painted facades and a few doors painted bright blue, a few shabbier ones painted black or dull red. Looming over the rooftops was a huge round structure shaped like a crown, and there was a Virgin Mary statue tucked into an alcove on the sidewalk. Children played and shouted in the street, their cheeks pink from the cold. With a little thrill of recognition, I thought, the cold air stung us and we played till our bodies glowed. Ireland. It wasn't the way I thought I'd get here. I'd been about to spend my junior year studying at Trinity when my mom got sick. Lately, I'd been thinking about graduate school. The brochures from Trinity and UCD were still in the top drawer of my desk. Ireland. I could smell the ocean and something like wood smoke, and I inhaled deeply, clearing the stale odor of the cab from my nose. As I stood there, the sun broke through the clouds for a moment and illuminated the wet sidewalks, throwing the little row houses and brightly painted doors into impossibly beautiful color. It stopped me for a minute, the sheer magic gorgeousness of it, all the saturated reds and browns and blues, the light, the proportions of the houses, the shine of a silver car parked against the curb. So I'll stop there. So that's Maggie's introduction to Ireland. I think there's something about it that just sort of grabs her right away, as it did me.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for reading that part. I love that. I love every description of Ireland in your book. All right, so can I launch into questions? Are you ready?
Sure. Yeah. If that's what's next. Or were you gonna read as well, Miciah? Because I'm excited to hear a reading from you as well.
Well, let me ask you a question that I feel like relates to like the part that you just read, and then we'll sort of go into it and see if there's a place where I need to read, then I will. Because so I have to say that I really I loved reading the book. It was so much fun to read. And then I had this very distinct feeling that I sometimes get, but only with certain books, where I really missed it when I was done. I just felt like that loss, and longed to be back there in that place with those people. So it just really immersed me in it. And some of that I think was the mystery, of course, that I was sort of felt like I was working with Maggie, working with this group of people to try to solve the mystery. And so that makes you feel, a connection. But just the place was drawn so interestingly, with such detail, with such kind of care and attention. So here's the thing that I've been thinking about. I teach at VCFA in the MFA in Writing and Publishing program. And we just gave a lecture the other night, my colleague and I, about obsession for writers. Mm-hmm. And the idea was your obsessions are basically gold. The things that you as young writers, can't stop thinking about. Yep. You have to pursue those, invite those things in and mine those. That's where the energy is going to be in your writing. And so many writers I just wrote down a couple quotes. Kafka has this quote about obsession: don't bend, don't water it down, don't try to make it logical, don't edit your own soul according to the fashion, rather follow your most intense obsessions mercilessly. Yeah. And, John Irving said, you've got to get obsessed and stay obsessed. Robert Bly said, it's a great calamity for a human being to have no obsessions. So I was just really thinking about it. And I started thinking about it in relation to your book, because, in both of our books, that's sort of one of the echoes in our books, is that we have written these characters who are really obsessed, in deep ways. So I guess I just wanted to ask you about that, about Maggie's obsession with finding out what happened to her cousin Erin.
Yep.
With and just sort of your own obsessions, I guess, and what made it into, what were the things the threads that you couldn't let go of that led you into this book?
Yeah. So I love that you brought that up, because I think that's, I feel like we talk about this as writers in a lot of different ways. We sort of talk around it sometimes. I think people often will say, if you have a couple of different ideas and you're not sure which one to work on, like work on the one that you can't forget about, that you can't stop thinking about, that you know, and I find that to be really true, that it's like the project that I'm obsessed with is the one where that's where I should go. That's where I should put my energy.
Yeah.
And I think too, that when you have what is an obsession? It's kind of a single-minded focus on something, right? I think it in a way, it's like a heightened awareness, right? Like whether you're obsessed with a person or a place or an object, or it's like you have this heightened awareness of that thing, of the object of your obsession. And of course, heightened awareness is where it's at for a writer. And that's where you get all the great details and the visceral, sensory stuff. So I think that's so true. For me, I think, there are a bunch of obsessions that made their way into this book. And the biggest one, of course, is Ireland. I lived in Ireland and I went to graduate school there. And then I sort of came home and I was interested in it. I continued to be interested. I continued to read a lot of Irish literature. I stayed in touch with my friends from Ireland. But there was sort of this period of my life where it was very much on the back burner. And then it was interesting, as my kids started to get a little bit older, it kind of came roaring back. And it was like something I had to explore again. And I started traveling there some more, and I started learning the Irish language. I started taking Irish language lessons. I started reading a lot more. I started just kind of like entertaining it in a lot of different ways in my life. And it was very satisfying. And that's when I wrote this book. And so it was kind of like that obsession had to make its way back into my life for me to write this book.
Yeah, that makes sense, because that's, I think, what I was getting at with just how it connected to that. The passage that you read was that, like, that level of care and love in your sort of recreation of a place doesn't come without some pretty deep feelings about the place, Yeah.
Well, and of course, I absolutely felt that way about the island in your book. There's a real obsession there on the part of Lydia and Lucas, who know it so well. But of course, on Cole is like literally obsessed.
Yeah.
He's obsessed with this other thing. Yeah. And it just, there were so many people who were obsessed with it. And I absolutely, that same attention to details there. And it's what I love about your book. And so it's I'm so glad you kind of pinpointed for me where that's coming from.
Yeah. My book, the thing you said about, the project you should work on is the thing you can't stop thinking about. I feel like that definitely happened to me. And I worked on my book for a long time, like too long. But by the end of it, when I was like really kind of finishing it, in the last stages of finishing it, I just remember the feeling of sort of, when you like close your eyes at night or you wake up in the night and you can't go back to sleep right away. And that was where I would go at that time, like to Wolf Island, which is where my book takes place, on this sort of fictional island off of Cape Cod. And I would just travel there in my mind. I could see it, I could experience it. I think I was pretty obsessed by the end of it with this fictional thing I'd created.
It's good. It shows, and it's a good thing. The obsession, I think, is a good thing. And I think writing is a very healthy way to explore obsessions. It's funny. I remember at one point saying to my husband that I felt like I wanted to go to Ireland. Like I wanted to take a trip and travel around a little bit. And it felt like it was like this thing I had to do. It was sort of, and I remember saying like, it feels like it's almost an identity thing. It's like, in order to be who I am, I've got to start kind of entertaining and exploring this part of my life again. And I think that's an obsession.
Did you, when that happened, like when you had that conversation and said, I want to go, it's like this identity thing, were you already working on the book, or did that come after you returned?
I think I had started to work on the book a little bit. So I had this great, it was like, oh, I have to go do research.
Right.
Which is the great thing about being a writer. You always have the excuse of going places to do research, right?
It's all research. That's right.
So Yeah, no, I had just started to work on it, but I knew I needed more. I knew I needed to be there. I needed to like see these places again and be there.
Yeah. And remind yourself, and the colors, the color palette, the like texture of the place. Yeah.
Is Wolf Island based on an actual island, or did you invent it whole cloth? I wondered about that a lot as I was reading.
I invented it totally. I mean, I grew up on Cape Cod, and it feels like Cape Cod to me, but it was really important to me that it was an island because I needed my characters to feel kind of like trapped there, so it's these sort of grown-up twins. Another similarity between our books, that you have this woman and her cousin who have always looked very much alike, and I have actual twins, like boy-girl twins in my novel. I feel like it's a very sort of Gothic element to have twinning, and mistaken identity. And but I need it. So I have these sort of boy-girl twins grown up who have lived on this island, this very sort of insular life, and had a sibling who died in infancy who has sort of haunted their lives in dramatic ways. And then so when the book starts, a stranger shows up on the island, and they sort of become convinced that he's like the reincarnation, like their brother who had died returned to them. And he seems sort of familiar with them in spooky ways. And then he really begins to sort of infiltrate their lives. And but so I needed like my character to be sort of trapped on this island. So that's why I made it an island. And also there was something that really appealed to me about it being like in terms of sort of creating all the details of this world, it just being something contained and small, that I only needed to see what was in this little area. I didn't have to know what was outside of that. Made it really manageable for me in terms of creating it, my imagination. So that's why I put it there. I imagined it. There's like a string of islands called the Elizabeth Islands right off of Cape Cod, and they're small and kind of uninhabited for the most part. They're not like, Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard. So I imagined if there was another island attached to the Elizabeth Islands that was bigger and more inhabited, like not quite so touristy and big as the Vineyard or as Nantucket, but not as uninhabited as that string of islands. So I sort of, in my mind, that's where it was and what it was like.
Cool. Well, it feels like it exists somewhere out there.
Yeah.
It really does.
Great. So you know what I just read? Did you see? So I just read this article, this new thing. There's a new book coming out that's sort of the letters between J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan, and Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote Treasure Island. And apparently they were very good friends, like passionate friends. They'd never met, but they wrote letters for like over a decade, and just really loved each other and really like admired each other's writing, and just a super intense friendship. And they had, in the past, we've had the Robert Louis Stevenson's letters, but we never had Barrie's letters, the response, and those were just uncovered. So they're all being published together in a book. And the thing that's really, so they loved each other so much that it turns out that Peter Pan, that was written, I think like 12 years after they started corresponding. So this was like deep into their passionate friendship. Peter Pan has a lot of little like references to Robert Louis Stevenson and to Treasure Island and to their correspondence that no one really realized or picked up on because we didn't have that side of the correspondence. And so, even people are realizing it really seems to be based on the same fictional island that Treasure Island is based on. And some even remember that like famous, line from Peter Pan when he's saying how to get to Neverland. It's like first star and straight on till morning or something. And that like sort of that line comes from something that Robert Louis Stevenson like wrote to him in a letter. And there's all these kind of tiny little references to things they talked about that only Robert Louis Stevenson would get, or us, I guess, now that we've read the letters. But it made me just wonder about every book. Like, do you, and then I thought, I feel like I like have a couple of those little things in my book that are like little, I don't know, like, you know, little Easter eggs or little sort of
tributes to other writers or to books you
yes.
love.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you have that? Do you have that? Do you have like little things that only your friends from Ireland would know or anything like that?
To a certain extent. I mean, I did throw like, I think one of the things that I was sort of doing especially in the 1993 sections where Maggie first goes to Ireland, is that she studied Irish literature in college, and it felt sort of theoretical. And then she goes there and she sees the kids playing on the street, and she recalls the line from the James Joyce short story about kids playing on the street. And and throughout the book there are little references to Joyce and to a few other Irish writers. And that was just sort of very much from my own experience that it's always amazing to go to the place where something was written, especially for an author who is so geographically sincere and realistic. Joyce, everything in Joyce is like, you can find it you can walk around Dublin and find it. And so that, I think that was definitely there. But I don't think I have little things dropped in that are kind of hidden messages to anybody or like that. But I'm curious, I want to hear now what yours are.
Some of mine are. I mean, well, some of them I'm not going to say because they're secret messages just for that person. But I just realized, I just remembered somebody had like sent me or written a little social media post about it or something when the book first came out and just said, I loved your book and thanks for giving me a diner in it. And I realized that I had like named the diner pretty purposefully after my friend who, her name's Meredith, but we always called her Matey. That was just her nickname. So it's not like, and so I was called it Matey's Diner. I mean, and it was like, I definitely named it for her as I was writing it. But then once I named it, I forgot that it didn't just exist. So I had forgotten by the time she read it that she would see that I had given her a diner in my book, and things like that. I mean, I have some references in it that were kind of important to me, like to The Tempest, but so subtle that I didn't feel like people would pick up on it. And like, I have a poem that people would pick up on because it's not subtle. But the one other thing I could think of, I have a favorite children's book that like my kids love and we've always loved. It's called The Gray Lady and the Strawberry Snatcher. It's a picture book without any words, and it's by a writer named Molly Bang, who's from my town on the Cape where I grew up. And Molly Bang at one point told us this story. She my kids met her and they felt like it was like they were meeting a celebrity, because she'd written this book that they loved. And there's a picture on the last page of the book of a horseshoe crab hung up on the wall with a forked tail. And this had a special significance for her, and she told my kids the story of it. And then I put one into my book. I had Lydia come in one day and find everything seemed sort of strange. And then there was this horseshoe crab with a forked tail on this that they had collected off the beach, on the counter. And I don't know, it just was like this echo of
a little gift. That's great. I love that.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. Kind of a fun thing.
Are you going to read us something from your book? I have one question I want to ask you too. Yeah. And I do want to get into talking about the twin thing. And that's sort of, that's something that I just love about your book, but I'd love to hear a little something.
Yeah, I'll do a little snippet. I have a 1-page section that I felt like kind of, I think it kind of gets at the twins, my character's sort of obsession with this dead sibling who they have always believed, especially the brother Lucas has always believed is gonna find a way to come back to them somehow. So the person telling the story is Lydia, her twin brother Lucas. She's talking about him. They're 28 years old at this point. Okay, I'll just read this little bit. Lucas began turning lights on. Oh, and so the baby infant in the pregnancy was called Baby B. And so that she refers to the baby either as Baby B or Colin, which was his name after he was born, the baby who's died 28 years ago, Lucas began turning lights on for Baby B when we were still tiny, 3 years old, 4 years old. He left a nightlight on in the hallway in case Baby B came back in the night. Then he started leaving the bathroom light on, then the hallway light, the kitchen light, the closet. We can't sleep when the lights are on, my parents told him. How will he find the house in the dark? Lucas asked. He doesn't need to see, my mother said. It doesn't work like that. Do you know that for sure? He asked. And of course she didn't. Then he would forget about the lights for a while. A couple years later, the lights would be on again. He'd turn them all on after my parents had gone to bed. Or he'd play music for Baby B. Lucas opened all the windows and blasted Nina Simone, Here Comes the Sun, and Mr. Bojangles, because those were the songs Baby B liked. How did Lucas know Baby B liked those songs? Good question. We were 10 when he started playing Nina Simone, always with the windows open as if Baby B were a bird who might alight on the sill, always full blast. He's not deaf, he's dead, I used to tell him. Or he would bake for Baby B, cinnamon cookies, the spice of them filling the kitchen, drifting out the open windows. The lighthouse was like the world's tallest candle. Lucas climbed up to be closer to his brother. He climbed to be closer to that light, calling him home. He was a sucker for a beacon. My mother didn't exactly encourage him, but she had her own rituals for remembering Baby B. She lit candles, burned incense, sang to him on our birthday. The way I saw it, they were complicit. She said she could feel him close by sometimes, and Lucas believed her. What did I believe? I wasn't sure. When the stranger came, we were 28 years old. We'd been orphans for almost 10 years. We'd been happy, but we'd been lonely. We'd both longed for more. Just do that a little bit.
I love it. I love it. It's interesting because I was thinking about how, so in my book, Maggie and Erin are not sisters, they're cousins, but they grew up they were both only children, and they grew up really more like sisters. They spent a lot of time together. And as I was drawing both of them, I realized at some point that the central dynamic between them was that Erin was quite troubled in many ways, but she was also kind of the charismatic one. She was the one who people were drawn to, and yet she was the one with most of the pain. And I got really interested in that idea of kind of being the twin or the twin-like figure to someone who is struggling in a way that you're not. And I see that in Lydia and Lucas's dynamic too, that, Lucas has these struggles that she is so sympathetic to and so understanding of, and yet they're not struggles that she has. And I'm curious about how was that there right from the beginning, or was that something that kind of developed as you were writing?
I mean, some of it was there from the beginning, because in my book, when the stranger comes back and they believe that it might be their brother sort of come back to them, I needed one of them to really believe that wholeheartedly. So I had to create a character who would believe that. And so some of Lucas's characterization is that he has a deeper need for that. He has a deep need. And so this stranger coming back satisfies this lack, in him. And so Lydia needed to be, Lydia has her deep needs too, but she needed to be she couldn't believe it in the same way, though it wouldn't work. She had to sort of see things more realistically. So I think just out of that narrative need, the story needed those two things. And so their characters arose out of that to some extent. And then I had to sort of sharpen their characters in revisions as I went on. And some of what's, for my characters, there are a lot of flashbacks and memories from when they were young, but most of it, it almost all takes place in this present moment at this age. But part of it is that they're one of the things that's happened with this death of their sibling, and then their obsession with him all these years is they've been kind of stunted, like just left in childhood in this funny way. Their parents died when they were quite young, and they sort of just stopped growing up, they didn't grow. And so their sort of like attachment to each other, and Lydia's feeling that she needs to really take care of her brother, who does sort of need taking care of, has just kept them. They're in their childhood home. She realizes at some point that like they've just never rearranged the furniture. The glasses, the dishes have started breaking over the years, and they've never thought to replace them. They just aren't quite growing up. So for her, one of the things, that needs to happen in the book is she needs to unfreeze time and start to, grow and develop. And that means maybe getting a little distance from this twin so that she can, grow. And that's the interesting thing about your characters, is that Erin is this beautiful, charismatic character, but kind of in a way that stops Maggie from being the beautiful, charismatic one ever, because that role is taken,
Exactly.
And so in Erin's absence, she can fill that a little bit, only because she doesn't know what happened to Erin. Erin is never really absent. She's always there.
That's right. Yeah, it's like she can't really move on until she finds out what happens. And I think that's in many ways that's the root of her obsession with solving the mystery.
Yeah.
That she has to unstick herself. Everything about her life is very focused around, she still lives in the same town. She still, spends a lot of time with Erin's father, her uncle, and, who owns the bar. She married someone who was Erin's friend. She kind of ordered her life around Erin, even though Erin's gone. And in order to kind of break that spell a bit, she has to go back to Ireland and she has to figure out what happened.
Yeah.
That's an interesting
another interesting
way
parallel. Yeah, that's for sure. So I do have more questions, but let's
look at the chat.
Yeah, if you have questions, why don't you put them in the chat right now to make sure that they're there, and then we'll make sure we don't just keep talking over them.
I see one from Michelle. Michelle asked me, is the name Darcy a reference to Pride and Prejudice? No, it's not. So the way, I think I was, as I was trying to come up with Maggie's name, I sort of invented a family history for her. And I think part of this was, the Long Island parts of the book are set in this very Irish American community. And, Erin's father, whose name is Danny Flaherty, owns a bar called Flaherty's. And his sister, who is Maggie's mother, has married someone who's Irish American, but like a slightly different flavor of Irish American. And I was very interested in sort of these extremely nuanced kind of differences in Irish American immigration and, what the years that people immigrated and all of that. And so I think I was kind of creating these two different families, and the sort of Anglo-Norman name Darcy, it was a slightly different sort of flavor of Irish American. And I was just really interested in exploring some of that. So that's where it came from. You know what though? I love Pride and Prejudice, and maybe in the back of my head, it was I was thinking of Mr. Darcy or Ms. Darcy.
That's great. So Sue just asked about our characters, major characters, but also even the minor characters. In your book, you're so full of minor characters, right? There's like Erin's roommates, and there's everyone, all the detectives working on the force, in Ireland, and there's so many, all the people that Maggie kind of interviews at both periods of time trying to find information. So how do you get ideas for your characters, and then how do you make them realistic, I guess?
Yeah, I find that in my first draft, I'm a huge reviser. Like my books go through a lot of drafts, and
Yeah.
my first drafts are very sketchy. Like I'm really just trying to figure out the story I'm trying to tell. And I write fairly quickly, and I I there's no judgment at all. I like take my editor off my shoulder for the first draft, and I really am just kind of like vomiting the story out on the page. And
Yeah.
in those early drafts, the main characters are there, and I feel like I have a sense of their essence, but the minor characters are still pretty sketchy. They're sort of fulfilling a purpose. Like, I need a guy to be there who she can interview about this thing, and he's just the guy who she interviews about this thing at that point. And it's really later in revision where I sometimes with minor characters, I'll like just throw things at them that I've been saving up. Like
Yeah.
like a couple months before, I was walking down the street and I noticed a guy who was wearing a leather jacket, and he had a parrot on his shoulder, and you could see where the parrot had like scratched away the leather, just like little details like that. And often I'll throw those things at those minor characters and just be like, okay, you're this guy, or you're this person I went to high school with. Like, I'm going to take from this person and put some characteristics onto this minor character.
That's
Whereas major
amazing.
characters are really much more, it's like I kind of imagine them fully, and I really spend some time on their backstory and who they are and how,
Yeah.
getting to know. What about you, Miciah?
Well, I mean, I was thinking you already know this, but that I read another article recently, that a study done on writers that said that 63% of writers hear their characters' voices in their minds, like full on auditory experience, hear the inflections, hear the voice. And I do that. So I would like love seeing this study, because I was like, oh, it's not just me hearing voices. This is how writers out there work. Some of us, but for me, a character is sometimes a little flat or isn't really coming to life because I don't yet hear it. So I have to sort of just, I don't know what the thing is that makes me able to hear it, but I have to spend time getting to a place where that voice is there. And as soon as I hear the voice, I can see the character and I start to know some things about them. And even a minor character, it's that hearing them speak that does it for me.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, Vicky asked us a question. How does it feel once your book is published? Do you read it over and over again and analyze it more, or do you just let it live and be? Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I always have this sort of like, I don't know, once it's out, and I think it's because once it's out, you can't fix it anymore. You can't do anything more to it. And that is terrifying. And no matter how many times the book has been copy edited and how many people have gone over it, like there are typos that make it in. And there are lines that, sometimes I'll be doing a reading or something and I'll read a line and I'll be like, oh, I wish I could edit that. I want to edit that.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something really hard for me anyway about the book being out in the world, because I have no control anymore. And I feel proud, but there's like a certain amount of just discomfort involved in this whole thing. And it's funny. I was talking to a friend the other day about how like signing a book contract is so wonderful. And like, cause it's just pure. It's like the promise of something coming and you're excited and it's like a culmination, but that the actual book coming out is like it's exciting, but it's not a pure experience in any way, shape, or form. And then you're going to be judged too, so it's terrifying.
Yeah, it's terrifying. Agreed. Yeah, you have to, like when you're on book tour and you're doing readings, like you have to be in it still and reading it a bunch, but I don't think about it or like read over it ever if I can help it at this point. Because I can't, it's going to stay the same even as I change at this point. Like there's no changing that book. But Sarah, you can't do that. You can't forget about Maggie because you are literally writing another book about her, because this is a series.
I just finished writing the second one in the series and I'm now working on the third one in the series. So you're right. It's like I'm not going back and revisiting the actual book, but I have to remember what happened and I have to remember all the little details. And I'm like sticking, I'm right with her. And to a certain extent, I do have the opportunity to layer in more backstory. And I can, if there's something I felt like I underexplained in the first book, in the second book, I can, have a scene where she goes back and gives us some more context about something, or, so that's a nice thing about a series.
Yeah, that's true. That is nice. So Lori asked about our titles. How do we get our titles for our books? I don't think I've ever heard the story of how you got your title.
So the whole time I was writing the book, I sold the book with a different title. And the title, and now I look back and I'm like, that was so lame. Why did you pick that title? But the title through the whole process was simply Erin. The title was Erin. And I thought it was, I liked that it was her name, but it was also this sort of play on Erin being the word in the Irish language for Ireland.
Right.
And it just, I don't know, I liked it. But now I look back and I think, wow, that was cheesy. And I'm really glad my editor forced me to change the name. And she didn't like Erin, but she didn't have another suggestion. So she sort of said to me, like, it can't be Erin, but you need to come up with a title and you need to come up with it quickly. And I went to traditional Irish music. I sort of started listening and revisiting lyrics of tunes that I loved. And I knew I wanted to find one about immigration. Like a lot of traditional Irish tunes are about immigration and sort of the relationship between America and Ireland. Because I think that's like a lot of this book is about that relationship and like the misunderstandings and the connections. And I was listening to Skibbereen, which is a traditional immigration tune. And there's a line in it where an old immigrant in the United States is thinking back on Ireland, and he remembers the mountains rude and wild. And there was just something about that I liked, and so I kind of chopped it up, and that's where it came from.
Oh, that's a good story. I like that a lot. That's amazing that you went to music.
What about you? Where did Goodnight Stranger come from?
Mine was called, when I sold it under the name Water Baby, which I really loved. I still love that title. And my editor was like, no, like it just doesn't capture the like creepiness and the darkness of the book. It just isn't it sounds too lighthearted. And my friend told me it sounded like, spring break with like these twins, spring break with twins. It was too. So, I loved it. And then, my editor was like, so we need to come up with another title. And it was endless. It was endless lists of titles for months.
Titles are so hard.
Hard.
Oh God, I have the worst time with them.
They're so hard.
With my second book. And it was like, my editor rejected my title for the second book too.
What was it?
So the whole time I was writing it, it was called The Savior. And which is sort of a thematic thing in the book. And I loved it.
Yeah.
And my editor was like, nope, you can't have. And so I was sort of inspired. I went to source material, and I found a poem by Catchless about a soldier and going to a grave, and there's a line in it about a distant grave, and the title is actually like something on a distant grave, and so the title of the second book is now A Distant Grave.
Ooh, that's really good. I really like that.
But it's so hard, right? Finding coming up with titles is so hard.
It's so hard. Lizzie, who's here, says she remembers me coming to work with the final full 4 titles and polling everybody for I was so obsessed. And Goodnight Stranger always sounded a little, I don't know what. Well, first of all, it sounds like that 80s song, Goodbye Stranger, that. So like,
right. Yeah.
That's always getting stuck in people's minds. But I've come around. I like it. It's one that my editor came up with and was like, what do you think? And I was like, let me think about it. But you have to fit, like, the thing I kept thinking was like, editors know more than writers do about what titles are saying kind of out there to readers and to booksellers. And so you have to at some point trust that they know what they're talking about, right?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story too. So I don't know if anyone else has seen the trailer for this film that has just come out called it's about to come out, called Wild Mountain Thyme.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yes.
it's set in Ireland. And it took me a minute to realize that it's actually the play Outside Mullingar that they've made into a film, and they retitled it Wild Mountain Thyme. So I started getting messages from people who were like, "Oh, your book was made into a movie."
Oh no.
So I started looking, and I go and I start looking, and all of a sudden I follow a lot of like Irish writers and Irish friends on Twitter. And I started noticing that like every person in Ireland was posting this story from the Irish Times about how terrible the accents are in this movie and how Irish people absolutely hate this movie.
Oh,
And
no.
how it's like a travesty, and it's very funny. So sometimes you don't know what's going to happen with the words in your title, and you have no control over
Exactly.
over what to do with it.
But you know what? Your book would make a really amazing movie, or like a series, like a Maggie Darcy series.
It would be great. It would be great. That whole business is a very I've had like little bits of contact with that whole business, and it's better to put it out of mind and just sort of, if it
Not
ever
even think
happens,
about it.
great.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of hearts are broken in that business.
Yeah. Agreed. Oh, Liz. Hi, Liz. Hello out there.
Oh, hi, Liz Schlegel.
Liz says, as a mystery reader who loves series books, she's looking forward to more.
Great.
Do you have writers that you particularly admire for their world making, the stuff that sustains a series?
Oh, yes. That's what I love so much about mystery series. So I just recently started reading Ellie Griffiths. I don't know if you've ever read her, but she writes a couple different things, but she writes a series featuring a woman archaeologist named Ruth Galloway, and they're great. And that's like the way she builds the world in those books is really, really terrific. Who I feel like my friend Sarah Peel is on this talk, I think, and she would be the best person to answer this question. At least I think she's still here. Yes, there she is.
She's right there.
Sarah reads more mysteries than anybody I know, and she could probably drop in the chat a couple of really good recommendations for books that do world building well.
It looks like she's on it. She's going to do it.
Fantastic at this. But let's see, who else have I read lately that I love, I just started reading the new Tana French, which I'm loving. I love her books. And I think of her Dublin Murder Squad books as really like building a world, even though the characters are sort of different or overlapping in each of the books. But I think, yeah. Oh, and Three Pines, actually, Liz, you're absolutely right. I think that's the classic. Louise Penny has just built such an incredible, everybody wants to live in that town, in the eastern townships of Quebec, for those who haven't read them, Louise Penny's mysteries. So yeah, there are a lot of really good ones.
It's amazing. It's great.
But yeah, Sarah Peel is dropping some in. She'll give us some recommendations.
Good. It's 8:00 right now. How, Sam and Michelle, does that mean we need to wrap up?
Yeah, I think we can take a couple more questions, but yeah.
Great. Can I ask you one question, Miciah?
Sure.
So as we were talking about the island, I was thinking about, when I was reading your book, I was thinking about how the island is sort of, it feels like this like mystical place that may or may not exist to the outside world, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
And I sort of had this thought about the symbolism of the ferry and how, what happens when they go back and forth on the ferry.
Yeah.
And, I was thinking about that scene where Lydia she's finally going to go somewhere else. She's going to go to Vermont. but she takes the ferry and she can't make it past.
Yeah.
She can't make it past the ferry landing. Like she
Yeah.
literally can't, like the pole of the island is just too much.
Yes.
And I just was fascinated by it, just by how developed I think that theme is, of this kind of mystical. I mean, almost like I almost had this sense of like the river Styx, like that to get across.
Yeah.
It's they're taking their lives in their hands, or they're entering some other
Yeah.
dimension, in a sense. And I was just curious how much that was like you were thinking about, or how much of that just kind of came out.
I think it all just came out. I don't think I was really thinking about it too much, but I love that you noticed that. And I think it's really true, just based on the fact that I have a short story that's not related to these characters or anything, but it just came out in the Harvard Review, and it takes place mostly on a ferry, and it's a woman who is like, sort of my age, married with children, but she's driving home one day and she sees in the car on the highway next to her in the car, her boyfriend from college who died, when he was 22, when they were 22 or whatever, but she sees him, she's sure it's him, and she follows him, and she follows his car all the way there in Boston. She follows him all the way down to the Cape and into Woods Hole, where the ferry comes in. And then she follows him onto the ferry, but she can't. And then she has to leave her car, because you have to make a reservation to bring your car on the ferry. So she couldn't do it. And she can't find him anywhere on the boat, but she finds his car and she gets in, and he never returns to it. And when the ferry docks, she drives off in his car. And it's just this very, so I'm like, I must be dealing with some symbolism about the ferry in all my writing. So thank you for pointing it out. I hadn't quite realized that I was doing that. But
yeah, no, it was like so strongly there. And I just loved it. It was just a lot going on there.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Cool. Oh yeah, actually, I'm glad you mentioned Sarah. Julia Spencer Fleming. She's a writer. She writes a series set in a small town in the Adirondacks, and there's this sort of cast of characters. The main characters are an Episcopal priest, a woman Episcopal priest, and the town's police chief, who's married when the series starts, but they fall in love, and there's a lot of drama. But there are all these sort of recurring characters in that little town, and I think that's a great example of
So cool.
of a place that you can return to again and again.
You guys, one thing about this list that you're putting in, this list of mystery writers, I haven't read a lot of mystery writers, and I would like to, in part because I enjoyed your book so much. But one of the things that I loved, Sarah, was that your sentence level writing is really good. Like, your sentences are beautiful. The imagery is beautiful. Interesting things are going, you know what I mean? It's smooth. It's just seamless. You never remember that it's written, if you know what I mean. Like, you just create that dream and you don't have to wake up from it, because the sentence level writing is so smooth. Do you feel like if I am like somebody who loves reading great sentences, who on this list that Sarah has just written and that you
definitely
said, like,
definitely Tana French. Tana French is it's just gorgeous, every line. Actually, someone who I just thought of who fits both of those bills, both the sense of place and the world building, and she's just a stunningly wonderful writer, is Attica Locke. I don't know if anybody's read Attica Locke's mysteries. So she writes this series, it's set in East Texas, and it's just like the way she draws East Texas is incredible. The first one is called Bluebird. And the series is about, her main character is a Black Texas Ranger. And the series the first one is just before 2016. And the second one is just after the 2016 election. And God, she's such a good writer. And the main character is just fantastic. And the way she describes East Texas, I knew nothing about East Texas. I never thought I had any desire to go to East Texas. And after reading these books, I want to go there. I want to see the Spanish moss. I want,
That's amazing.
Really good.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm going to read it. I love all these suggestions. That's so great. Well, okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Miciah.
This was wonderful. Read Sarah's book, please. You'll be happy you did.
Read Micaiah's story. And Micaiah, the story that you just told us about, which I'm dying to read now, where can I find it?
It's in the Harvard Review, which I think the only way to get it is to order it off of you, because Bear Pond isn't carrying lit mags right now, I think, right?
No.
Sam?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you just order it off the website.
Okay.
The most recent issue.
I have to read that story now.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And
Miciah,
thank
Sarah,
you,
this has
Kellogg-Hubbard. Thank you, Bear Pond. You guys are amazing. And we so appreciate all the work that went into doing this event.
Yeah, what a great discussion. Thank you for joining us, everyone. If you followed along on the chat, there were lots of good reading suggestions. So we can all hunker down for the winter with all of these mystery books that everybody's been recommending. Again, also with Micaiah's book and Sarah's book. I loved hearing the stories about the titles. I love that they had different titles when you conceived the book and when you sold the book, and then the editors are like, nah. Just reminds me of the process, that it's so much more collaborative than people realize. Thank you so much. I think we might send a wrap-up email so that you can have access to the video when it's done online. But thanks so much for joining us, Bear Pond Books and Kellogg-Hubbard Library, and Miciah Gault and Sarah Stewart Taylor.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.